to present in English.
Okay, no problem.
I think we can start. So I just introduced really briefly in the last paper that we are going to present in this long series of papers. We started in March 2020, and since then we have presented the 20 papers within this, let's say, series of COVID and the economy. So this was the main, the main line of research and analysis. This is the last paper in the list. The paper will be presented by Tommaso Ferraresi. The paper is, the title of the paper is COVID-19 and Italian regions, an interregional value chain approach. And Tommaso probably will show us the list of 9 co-authors from, if I'm not wrong, 5 universities, not only Italian, of course, but European universities. So, a large team of people working on this very interesting topic. This is the last seminar of the series. We have had, as we said, 20 papers. About 50 panelists, 50 authors that have presented these papers, and on average, about something like 40 attendees per seminar. So we think this has been quite an interesting experience for the Italian Economic Association, just to provide an additional contribution to this important issue, which is the influence and the impact, the negative impact of the COVID on the economy. So just before closing, 2 other information. The first one is that the paper and the slides, but probably the slides, and in the coming days also the paper will be uploaded on the website of the SIE, of the Società Italiana degli Economisti. And as a final suggestion, if you have, I am sure there will be questions. Questions should be addressed to Tommaso using the Q&A function. Please don't use the chat, because it usually, at the end of the seminar becomes full of not important things. So I think I don't have any other information or additional information to give to the to attendees. So we can start your seminar. You have 40 minutes and for presenting the paper, and we will have something like 15 to 20 minutes to discuss your paper. So the floor is yours, Tommaso. Thank you very much for giving us this seminar. Please.
First of all, thank you for the kind presentation and for accepting this work to this seminar series. Just a couple of words about the project. Actually, since you have seen many authors involved. Actually, this is a project. This is the first product of a project in which we are involved. We have been asked by the Minister of Innovation to work on the topic of the impact of the COVID-19 on the Italian economy, taking a regional approach. So, I will say the usual disclaimer is that what I'm going to show does not reflect the opinion of the minister, of course, but just the evidence collected by the authors. And okay, we have been asked to work on this topic, and in particular, this paper is born during the first lockdown. So we were in the spring, and the minister asked us a very, it should have been a simple question, but it turned out not to be that easy actually to answer. It was, okay, how do we deal with the reopening the economy? Okay, so all the economy was in lockdown, and we were kind of thinking about how to reopen it. And actually, we have been dealing with this task, and we designed this kind of a toolkit with can be used both for reopening a closed economy, but at the same time to close an open one. Okay, so I'm gonna show you in the final slides kind of a policy experiment that we did in the last weeks, just to show that you can use this toolkit to think about how to close a specific region, let's say the red regions, and to see, I mean, the economic impact of these closures. Okay, so this is the first product of this research was published in Italian on the website of the Minister of Innovation in June, and you can download it. Actually, we made some progress since June with our methodology and with the experiments we played with. Okay, the motivation. I think I should not spend too many words on the motivation. Actually, this is the map of the world in May. It was every country was in lockdown basically, and the COVID-19 actually impacted I mean our lives in many dimensions, and also the economy, of course. And there has been a kind of a huge amount of paper coming out since the dawn of the COVID crisis, and many topics have been investigated. And what we do in our work actually is to provide two kind of perspective, to have two perspectives together in a single framework. We are gonna present we are gonna work with an intersector approach and an interregional one. And I have two slides just to motivate these two kind of approaches. First of all, there is a demand for an intersector approach, of course, because sectors are not islands. So you cannot just close a sector and be fine, basically, because sectors are interconnected among each other and between each other. And of course, what was interesting with the COVID-19 crisis, it was that you had to link basically the places of consumption, let's say, so where the people consume, where the people buy product and services, because there are problems, contagion problems, let's say, in these places, but also production places. So think of the second wave. You have problems. I mean, you have the pandemic, which is running very fast in, let's say, Lombardy. So you're gonna close commercial services in Lombardy, but for instance, clothing commercial shops, but this is gonna affect production value chains in all other regions, all other Italian regions, and also other countries. So we needed a toolkit basically to link the places of consumption and those of production. Why interregional? Well, both from a health perspective, let's say, and an economic one. These are maps taken from the first wave, basically. You have both that excess mortality was concentrated in particular zones of the country, and even if you look at employees or in essential sectors, let's say essential goods and services sectors, you have a high heterogeneity, spatial heterogeneity. These maps are at the NUTS 3 level. So you have NUTS 2 heterogeneity, NUTS 3 region heterogeneity. You have a lot of heterogeneity. So you need an interregional approach. So what did we do? Basically, we build up basically interregional value chains from a final demand perspective. I'm gonna say how we did that, and basically, with this approach, we were able to distinguishing the places of consumption and those of production. Then we estimate the production activation, the employment activation of these value chains, and we also attach to each profession which is involved in these value chains a COVID-19 risk, let's say contagion risk, and let's say probability for remote work, let's say. So the potential for reducing such risk via remote work. And finally, I'm gonna show you some, a policy experiment that we did. We closed basically the non-essential goods and services value chain in red regions and apply remote work to all Italian regions and see how many people we could preserve from contagion and at which economic cost. This is the basic the basic database of our analysis. So what we did, we started from an international database that probably you know, which is the ICIO database provided by OECD, which is an inter-country input-output database. So you have more than 60 countries, if I remember well, and Italy is one of these, and they are all connected between each other via intermediate goods and services trade and also final goods and services trade. What we did in IRPET? We did it a couple of years ago, actually. We substitute Italy with Italian regions. Basically, in IRPET, we have a long tradition in building interregional input-output model, and so we started with our interregional tables, and we substitute Italian regions in the ICIO database instead of Italy, actually. How do you read this table? This is basically crucial for understanding the analysis. The interesting part of an interregional database is that you can basically use the very simple algebra of input-output even in an inter-country, international framework, because everything is endogenous in the model, so that you have by row and by column, you have the output of each sector in each region or country. So if you read it by row, basically you have that all the sectors. So the first row is agriculture in Piedmont, okay? So you have the destination of agricultural products produced in Piedmont. You have the destination. So in terms of supply of intermediates to all the sectors and all the areas in the database, and in terms of final goods and services provided by this industry, okay? If you read it by column instead, you have the sources of production, let's say. So agriculture in Piedmont demands intermediate goods and services from agriculture in Piedmont itself, and all other sectors and countries and regions in the database. Then you have value added, taxes, indirect taxes, and transport margins. Basically, with this database, you can easily build up value chains. How do you do that? You can select a particular demand shock. Let's say you are interested in consumption value chains. You take the consumption column. For instance, you are interested in Piedmont, you take the consumption column of Piedmont and you multiply it by the Leontief inverse. So it's kind of easy because you start from a shock that is a final need that you need to satisfy, let's say, and you compute all the production and employment which is involved in satisfying such need. But of course, at the starting point, we have all the components of final demand, let's say consumption, investment, you could have public expenditures, we had exports, but we are not satisfied with this kind of disaggregation. So we did something more. For consumption, for instance, we used the 12 expenditure functions provided by Istat to distinguish in consumption expenditures, food expenditures, alcoholic beverages expenditures, health expenditures, communication, housing, let's say clothing, the famous, in this pandemic function, restaurants and hotels, and so on and so forth. Then we disentangle internal investment in terms of construction investment and other kind of investment. And then we had basically 42 countries identifying exports value chain plus the rest of the world. And another kind of thing that we did, coming back to the ECO table, value chains are also identified geographically. So let's say we were interested, for instance, in computing, in evaluating the impact of clothing expenditures in Piedmont in activating production in all Italian regions, and so on and so forth. So we computed impacts for all the Italian regions in the database. Okay, so lots of value chains in the end. Okay, so usually in 40 minutes I cannot, if I spend a lot of time in showing the methodology, then I have no time to show you the results. So here just a couple of words to say what we did in order to estimate value chains in consumption, disentangling the different consumption, let's say, expenditure functions. So at the beginning we had, I go back here, we had flows. For instance, here we have consumption, all the consumption, internal consumption served by a sector, let's say. So agricultural sector serving internal consumption in Piedmont. We had to separate, so to disaggregate this flow into 12 expenditure functions. And we did it with a kind of a very simple operation. Basically, in IRPER, we also build a supply and use table for Italian regions. So we use the supply and use, the make matrix in the supply and use table in order to go from industries to products. And then from product, basically we aggregated the 54 products that we do have in the supply and use tables into 12 expenditure functions. And then we use a RAS in order to balance the flows so that we have in the end the national accounts, okay, provided by ISTAS in terms of 12 expenditure functions to be satisfied, and all the flows by row to be satisfied too. If you have questions in the end, I can go back to the methodology, okay? What about investment? Basically, we disentangle construction from other investment by basically assuming that construction investment is that part of investment which is served by the construction industry, okay, in each region. And what about exports? Basically, we aggregated final goods and services and intermediate goods and services flows, bilateral flows, connecting each Italian region to 42 plus the rest of the world destination market. And we use this as a final demand shock in order to identify exports value chains. Then we had to attach COVID risk and remote work, okay, potential. And go here, Basically, we use I don't know if you probably know this database, the INAP survey. Basically, collect a lot of indicators. Basically, let's say identifying many dimensions characterizing the tasks of each 5-digit profession in Italy. Okay, so there are many dimensions which are analyzed, and we use there is a dimension which is called the exposure to infections. Okay, so for each profession you have a sort of score denoting the exposure to infection of such a profession. And then there is another one, which is physical proximity, which basically indicates so how much close you work with respect to clients and colleagues and so on and so forth. These two dimensions have also been used by Barbieri, Cicchitano, and Basso in their work. We could use, of course, these two dimensions separately. Okay, so but in order to do not put, too much evidence, to do not comment too much evidence. In the end, we basically build up a single indicator taking the max of the two. And then we went from profession to employment by using the Forze di Lavoro survey. Okay, so that we could link each profession in each region to all the sectors that we have that we had in the table. We did something similar with remote work. Actually, we use the professions which have been identified in a work by colleagues of us in IRPET, which use 21 indicators in order and principal component analysis and clustering, basically to identify the professions which could be performed remotely. And in the end, they had an estimate which is around 1/3 of Italian, let's say, so Italian employees which could potentially work from home, an estimate which is in line with other estimates which came out this year by Boeri, Barbieri et al., for instance. And again, we use the Forze di Lavoro survey to go from professions to employees in our value chains. So here are some results, okay? So for instance, here, I'm gonna show you the clothing value chain at the Italian level. So the impact here was the clothing consumption demand by all Italian consumers. And you can see we saw the activations in terms of production and employment at risk. And we consider at risk the employees characterized by a COVID risk above the average, okay? Just for the sake of simplicity. So the production is in as a percentage of total production in each region. And you can see that regions which are specialized in these value chains are those in the center and in the south, in particular Marche, which is especially serving with respect to other regions such as Tuscany, for instance, is especially serving the Italian market, whereas Tuscany is more internationally oriented in this kind of value chain. If you go to an absolute measure of activation, of course, you see that Lombardy emerge as the region activating in which there are, the most of the employees activated by this value chain are basically employed, okay, with more than 1,000 of employees. Another interesting feature of this kind of activation, you could of course disentangle, the different sectors which are activated by the value chain. And for instance, in regions in which you have a larger population density which are larger markets in the end, let's say Lombardy and Lazio, you have a huge amount of employees in commercial services. Okay, whereas if you think of Tuscany, Marche, you have a lot of people involved in manufacturing of clothing value chains. We also looked at an example of, so what happens if you only close Lombardy demand for clothing? Okay, how, as we saw it happened with the second wave. Of course, I mean, the great part of the impact stays in the region that you close, but you also observe spillovers, okay, in all other Italian regions. So that in the end, if you close a market, you have spillovers in other regions. Here they are not really relevant, but if you start aggregating non-essential goods and services value chain, you end up with more relevant impacts. And this is interesting because you can close a region, but a part of contagion risk in that kind of value chain that you are gonna close basically is borne by other regions. So you have to take this into account. This is the accommodation and restaurant value chain, and you see a very different map with regions here and there to be activated. The most activated are Trentino Alto Adige, Tuscany, Apulia, and Sardinia. And this value chain at the Italian level involves 1 million of employees. And the interesting part is that we are going to see a slide in a couple of minutes. It basically involved, I mean, most of the tasks demanded in this value chain are highly exposed to contagion risk, as you probably expected, and they are characterized by a low teleworkability. Let's say that lots of tasks in this value chain cannot be performed from home. This is the food value chain. Again, a very different map. I mean, if you look at the share of production which is activated on total production, you see that the map moves toward the activation, let's say, moves to the south. Again, you have more than 1 million of employees which are involved in this value chain. A large of employment is in manufacturing, and if you compare it with the restaurant and hotels value chain, which is, of course, they kind of share a part of the sectors which are activated, let's say the agri-food system, okay? But the food value chain is more, let's say, it's more concentrated on manufacturing activities. If you take, I mean, the whole production chain, and probably the commercial services, okay, which are in charge of selling the final goods to the people, are less risky than hotels and restaurants in the end. So that the people, I mean, you only have 1/3, let's say, of people which are at risk and which cannot work from home. This is non-construction investment, very different map. So the activation moves to the north, as expected, let's say. And again, I mean, the activities, let's say, activated by this kind of value chain are less risky than, for instance, the restaurants and hotel value chain. So in the end, only 1/3 of the employees are both at risk and cannot work from home. This is the value chains activated by exports to Germany. Again, the north and the center is, contain the regions, let's say, which are more involved in this value chain. It activates 400,000 of employees. This is in line also with some estimates which came out some years ago on newspapers, actually. And 1/3 are at risk. And another map, I mean, this is the US, exports to the US. Again, you see the maps are somehow different from each other. But again, if you think about exports, basically you see that the northern part of the country is the one which is more involved in exports value chain. Actually, in the paper, not in the slide, but in the paper, we basically computed the aggregated impact of exports in the end. And whereas in the north, you have regions in which more than 30% of production is activated by exports. If you go to the south, basically this is more or less a half or even less. These are two examples, two value chains in which we show, I mean, at the same time, the employees which are involved, those which are at risk of getting infected by the COVID-19, according to our, let's say, methodology. Okay, I see a question, a Q&A. If maybe it's a clear. Okay, so thank you for the question. Well, I mean, at risk means that, okay, so they were asking what I mean with employment at risk. Okay, so as I said, we computed by using the INAP database an indicator of COVID risk, let's say. So there is a probability of getting infected and a proximity risk. These are two scores. We took the max of the two. These are also used in other papers, basically, which came out this year. And then we basically considered at risk those employees with an indicator, let's say, for which the index was above the average. Of course, this is a simplification. You can use this index as you wish in the end. So you can consider at risk just let's say, you can take the percentiles and just take, consider at risk the professions in the, let's say, in the 10th decile or above the median or above, the 75%. It also depends on your attitude, let's say, toward risk, let's say. So you would like to preserve only the people which are more at risk, or you can go, or you also would like to preserve other employees in the economy. Here we took this, let's say, simplification in order to, to show the results. But of course, you can use the measure that you want once you compute the indicator. Okay. So, for instance, in Piedmont, the food and beverage value chain, let's say, activate 70,000 employees. A half of that are at risk, and among those who are at risk, only the 20% can telework, can work from home. The risk, which is in the restaurant and hotels value chain, is, of course, it's different. Okay, so you have more or less the same amount of people which are involved in the value chains in Piedmont, but here the 80% of the employees are at risk. So it's a riskier value chain, and that's one of the reasons why. And in the end, when the government has to shut down some value chain, the restaurant and hotel value chain is the one which is the first one to be shut down. And among these people which are at risk, only the 10% can work from home. So basically, with this situation, the only possibility that you have when the pandemic is running, when the wave is running, is to close the value chain. Okay, you have no other options in the end. And you see that there is the heterogeneity is both between different value chains and also within the same value chain between the different regions. So, for instance, in the food and beverage value chain in Lombardy, 1/4 of the employees at risk can telework, whereas this is not true, for instance, in the south. For instance, in Sicily, only the 14% of people at risk can telework. Finally, I'm going to show you a policy experiment that we did with our toolkit in the second wave. We basically simulated the impact of closing down, of shutting down non-essential goods and services value chains in red regions. Let's say we closed shops, basically, in the 7 red regions identified by the Italian government. Lombardy, Tuscany, Trentino Alto Adige, Calabria, Aosta Valley, Campania, and I have a table to show all the names. And then we also, apart from closing down the shops in these regions, we also push remote work up to full potential in all Italian regions. Okay, and we computed the economic loss associated to these closures, and also we estimate the number of employees preserved from contagion in red regions by these two policies combined. And these are the results. Basically, if you close for 4 weeks, restaurant and hotel consumption, recreation and culture, miscellaneous goods and services, and I do not remember the other non-essential clothing shops, basically, for 4 weeks. These are the value-added losses. Okay, so you see that, for instance, in Lombardy, you have a loss of 1.3% of value added by closing this kind of shops, basically. And these value chains basically involve together more than 500,000 of employees. Okay, but you also have spillovers, as you can see, to other Italian regions. Let's say Veneto is involved for a 20 basis point value added loss. Of course, this is a 4-week loss closure. If you close it for 1 year, you have to multiply by 12 this shock, this impact. And these are the people that basically you can preserve from contagion. Let's say in Piedmont, you had in the end 700,000 of people, of employees at risk in all the value chains activated in Piedmont. You can preserve 200,000 of employees from contagion by pushing on remote work. So you push it up to potential. And at the same time, you can preserve 100,000 of employees by closing the value chains, which I named before. If you combine this policy, these two policies, you could preserve 300,000 of employees at risk. Okay, so with a fairly low economic cost, in the end, you could preserve from risk, a huge number of employees. Of course, here remote work is just potential. Okay, it's not. Of course, the potential does not come. I mean, it's an estimate. In the end, of course, the possibility to reach the potential depends on firms' characteristics and so on and so forth. We saw from the estimates from, the surveys published by Histat, that with respect to these potential estimates which came out during the year. I mean, the share of people in private firms really involved in remote working was much lower. So it's a kind of upper bound estimate. Okay, so and of course, in order to reach this kind of goals, you have to push on digitalization investment and so on and so forth. But of course, in the end, if data about professions and sectors and remote work are gonna to come out this year, we could substitute our potential estimates by the observed values. So just to close, in the end, I went very fast, I think. So if you have, of course, question in the end about the methodology, or you want me to go back to the different slides, we can go through. We presented a toolkit for basically reopen the economy, okay, so that you can think of each value chain that you are gonna to reopen as a bundle of tasks which basically provide both production and also a number of employees at risk. But you can also use it to shutting down the economy. And that's basically how did we use it with the red zones during the second wave. And also, of course, to measure the potential loss stemming from closures, from closing different value chains and so on and so forth. Just a couple of words about what we are doing at the moment. We basically went forward in our intersector, interregional approach, because we basically use our interlabor market area model to estimate this kind of value chains also at the let's say labor market areas level. We did a pilot study with Tuscany, but basically in the last couple of weeks we built up let's say interlabor market areas table for all Italian regions, and we connected each other. So we have a pretty huge table. Just to I'm gonna back to the data set. So here it's like we can substitute Piedmont with its labor market areas, and we did all this, the same for all the Italian regions. So it's a huge database which would like to exploit. Also to exploit, to answer the question, so what happens if you close a city instead of a region? Okay, so of course the virus is running faster in urban areas, as we know, with respect to rural areas. So you could wonder what happens if you close Milan or Bologna or Turin instead of closing up a region. And another kind of a project. So we did an empirical study. For estimating the impact of the Chinese lockdown on Italian regions industrial production, and we are gonna exploit input-output methodologies to look at bottlenecks and so supply shock basically along the value chain. And finally, we are working with with different models, actually not me directly, but people in the group, linking economic models and epidemiological models, so that the idea is to identify the right timing of intervention. So we are also working at an empirical model, basically to identify the exact timing of intervention. The idea, what the impression, basically the feeling was that in Italy we were basically 3 weeks too late to impose red zones and to basically to curb the second wave. So of course, if you choose the right timing of intervention, you both have less, let's say, a lower degree of mortality in the end, and you can also save in time in terms of economic costs. I'm done. So thank you for listening, and I'm gonna wait for a question.
So thank you, Tommaso. Thank you very much for presenting this paper. Definitely interesting, really interesting. Paper and analysis. So we have time for at least 10 minutes for questions or comments, or more information about the methodology or the approach or the results. Please use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask question to Tommaso. So what? May I start, Tommaso, with just a minor comment? Actually, it's a question. If I got it correctly, you did all this analysis using the results from the first wave of COVID, let's say. And I was wondering if, a second wave or another wave, potential a third wave, could change your results in a significant way. Do you think there could be some kind of influence of more than one wave of analysis?
Thank you for the question. Basically, okay, so the idea came out with the first wave, but the idea was, revealed to be more useful, I think, in the second wave. And I'm gonna spend 2 words to explain that. So if you think of the first wave, basically you had the economy was in lockdown, so you had sectors which had been shut down by the Italian government, and the value chain emerged a bit when the government was saying, okay, so if you are a firm which is working in a sector which is supposed to be closed, okay, by our DPCM, but you work in providing in a value chain which is providing essential goods and services, you can basically, you are exempted, okay, so you can go on producing. So basically in the first wave, the problem was more a kind of we were afraid of a supply shock, basically, and our toolkit is basically working from the demand side, okay. But if you think of the second wave, the way the government tackled the problem has been from consumption side. So okay, the government identified the places in which the contagion risk was higher, let's say restaurants and hotels, and shut it down them, and didn't close production. So production has been able to produce in order to fill the demand, okay, it's received, but the government closed basically the shops. So those activities which were more, let's say, close, which were the closest to the consumer, basically, choices. Okay, so it's more a toolkit which is working when you have closures from the demand side. If you work from the supply side perspective, of course, it's trickier. Okay, it's more tricky. But of course, this was thought to be a kind of toolkit for the government. Okay, so not only to analyze what was going on with the economy at that time. So okay, so
Okay, so it's fine. Thank you very much, Tommaso. There is another question by Luca Salvatici. You can read on the Q&A session. It is in Italian. Is there any connection between your data and other data set, such as TIVA or WIOD?
Yes, in a sense, the WIOD has been shut down basically. So it's a project. The last database coming out was the 2014 edition. Actually, we do have an integration of Italian regions in the WIOD system for 2014. We used it in some paper about value chains and so on and so forth. But then the project was shut down. So basically the data set is very similar. Okay, they are different, but the OECD data set is basically still active. Okay, so they are gonna publish tables up to 2018 in a couple of let's say months, so that we can also provide updates to our table. And the TIVA database you are referring to, if I remember well, is the one provided by the OECD again, but it's just a collection of indicators, let's say the value added in exports or double counting and so on and so forth, stemming from the ICHIO database. So the ICHIO database is basically the data set used by OECD, produced by OECD, and is the one that OECD used in order to produce the TIVA, the trading value added, let's say, statistics.
Okay, thank you, Tommaso, for this answer. Any other question? We have a couple of minutes, so if anybody want to profit of the opportunity. Tommaso, do you want to add something? We have a couple of minutes left before closing. If you want to add something to the presentation, we can use this very last part of the time we have.
Basically, I have maybe another question and answer.
Oh, there is, yes. Another
okay.
Question. It's on the paper availability.
Yes, we are finalizing actually the writing of the paper, so we are almost done. I hope in a couple of weeks it will be published in, for instance, the LEM discussion paper series of Sant'Anna, and I'm gonna send, of course, the paper once it's out to the SIE, so that it can be published to the web page and you can download it. Just a few words about our current projects, basically. So the fact that, of course, if you are if people, are interested in the audience in research using, for instance, labor market areas with an input-output approach, would be interesting to discuss together about the use of how to use this database, because it's gonna be really huge, basically. So you're gonna have 31 sectors for each labor market area of the in Italy, basically, apart from some regions like Molise or Valle d'Aosta, in which we collect, we aggregated the labor market areas because we had no enough data to distinguish the different labor market areas. But I think it's gonna be one of the most interesting part of our research in the future, because you can basically build up links, networks, linking different kind of let's say actors in the space, let's say metropolitan areas, industrial districts, and of course you can use it for the COVID analysis, but I think it's gonna be is gonna be really interesting, also for the studies, about industrial districts, for instance, and so on and so forth.
So thank you, Tommaso. You have another question by Luca Salvati. Are the interregional tables available?
Oh, basically, at the moment we basically share it. We share them with the people involved in the project. Usually we do not publish them, but we provide them to people we cooperate with us. I mean, in projects like this one, basically. I don't know whether there will be a time, probably next year, we are gonna publish let's say the regional table. Okay, there was this idea to publish the regional tables. Of course, to build up an interregional table, you need to connect the regions together. This involves a huge effort from us, but usually if for the people who ask us to cooperate for some project, we do usually share them. Okay, so but we do not publish them. Basically, they are at the moment kind of core business of our activity. But of course, we are pretty open to cooperate. We cooperate with Bank of Italy. We are working with this COVID project. In this kind of projects, we usually share the tables without problems. So if you're interested in working in this kind of topics, write an email, contact me somehow, and we are gonna talk and discuss.
Okay, Tommaso, no more questions. So it's 6 o'clock. We are perfectly on time. I think that we can stop here. So,
okay.
So thank you, Tommaso. Thank you to you and all.